My resting heart rate hits 58 beats per minute at age 52 and I hadn't set foot in a gym. 58 is athlete territory. I know that now, I didn't know it then. I was just watching the number fall week after week and I couldn't work out what was causing it because I wasn't doing anything that should have changed it. I've got 13 years of NHS blood tests and a body that's been through the full range, 18 stone to where I am now, 13.3. 6 medications to none. In the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to show you the actual data from a 21-day fast that produced a cardiovascular reading I had no right to have, and what it tells us about what's actually driving heart health that nobody really talks about. First, the 58 beats per minute number, where it came from, what was happening inside the body that produced it, and why it appeared without a single training session. Then the early warning signal, because this kind of change doesn't start at week 3, it starts at, well, for me, day 12. And if you're noticing your body behaving differently as you get older, there's a specific pattern in the data you'll want to see. And then the thing I got wrong about fitness for 40 years, which is that I thought cardio was how you earned a better heart. Turns out it's the last piece, not the first. I'll be honest with you, I'm not someone who's had a healthy relationship with the body for pretty much all of my life. Overweight for most of it, not the person checking fitness metrics, tracking heart rate, or doing the things that the healthy people do. It wasn't me. So when I picked up a heart rate monitor, partway through my 21-day fast in June 25, it wasn't because something told me to, it was just curious. I'd been tracking blood sugar, ketones, weight, I had numbers everywhere, and I thought, while I'm at it, let's see what this is doing. Day 12 of the fast, resting heart rate, 66 beats per minute. I didn't know what that meant, if I'm truthful. I looked it up, the average resting heart rate for a man my age, mid-50s, not particularly fit, history of being overweight, somewhere between 70 and 80, give or take. Anything under 60 is generally considered athletic range. I was at 66 and I hadn't been to the gym, I hadn't started running, I hadn't done anything you'd call cardiovascular exercise. I'd been lying in bed, doing my normal work and fasting. That was the puzzle. How was my heart getting slower? In a good way, when I wasn't doing anything that was supposed to make that happen. The conventional story around heart health goes like this. You do cardio, your heart gets stronger, your resting heart rate drops. You run, cycle, swim, the heart becomes more efficient, pumps more blood per beat, doesn't need to work as hard at rest. That's the textbook version. Exercise first, better heart rate follows. I'd done none of that, and the numbers kept falling anyway. Let me show you the timeline, because the pattern only makes sense when you see it laid out. This was my 21-day water fast, June into July 25. No calories, electrolytes, that's it. Day 12, 26th of June, resting heart rate 66 beats per minute. First time I checked, dropped from whatever it had been before. I hadn't been tracking prior to the fast, so this was my first data point. I kept checking. Day 15, still 66. Day 17, 65. Small movements, but they were heading downwards. The fast ended on the 7th of July. Post-fast reading, the lowest it got, 58 beats per minute. 58. I'm going to say that again because I want it to land properly. 58 beats per minute at 52 years old, having not run for exercise in, well, ever, really. Having been on 6 medications 18 months prior, having been 18 stone at my heaviest, that's not the reading I was supposed to have. Now here's the honest version of what happened next, because I want to be straight with you. This isn't the story about how I permanently transformed my cardiovascular system. The heart rate came back up when the fast ended and normal eating resumed. Not dramatically, not to where it started, but it didn't stay at 58. The body found a new equilibrium, somewhere above that, and settled there. I think that's actually the more useful data point, not the 58, because it tells you something true about what fasting does. It changes the body's setup temporarily. It gives you a window into what's possible. It does things that shouldn't be happening according to the standard model. But it doesn't mean that's where you permanently live. That's not how it works. That's not realistic. And this matters. It's not necessary. What was also interesting, the scan I had around the same period confirmed that across the 21-day fast, I hadn't lost muscle, or much of it, 26.7 pounds of total weight loss. Not all fat, but the muscle was still there. The body had been protecting it, which means the cardiovascular load the heart was dealing with had dropped substantially, without the heart having to get stronger in the conventional sense. The body had just got lighter and cleaner, and the heart was responding. That's not the same as athletic cardiovascular fitness, but it's not nothing either. There's a researcher called Mark Matheson, proper neuroscientist, did decades of work at the National Institute of Aging. He documented what happens to heart rate and cardiovascular function during intermittent fasting. And what he found was this: fasting reduces resting heart rate and blood pressure within 2 weeks and increases heart rate variability, which is the metric cardiologists actually use to assess cardiovascular health, in the same way endurance training does. Not because you're training, because what fasting does to the cardiovascular system directly. The mechanism, and I'll come back to this in a moment, has to do with the autonomic nervous system. When you're in a fed, insulin elevated state for most of the day, as most people are, your body runs with a certain baseline metabolic load. Heart has to work against that. When you remove the food signal, insulin drops, the body shifts fuel source, and the heart, along with everything else, starts running on a quieter, different baseline. Think of it this way. You know how learning to drive a manual car feels at the beginning. You're stalling at every roundabout, grinding gears, giving it way too much revs because you don't trust the engine yet. It's noisy and inefficient, and you're working much harder than you need to be. By month 3, you're barely thinking about it. Gear changes happen without looking. The engine's doing exactly what it needs to do, and no more. That's metabolic adaptation. The gearbox, I call it. The heart, when the metabolic conditions change, stops having to rev so hard. It learns to idle properly. 7th of July 2025, end of the fast. I checked the heart rate monitor one more time before I broke the fast. 58. I want to be careful not to overclaim this moment. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't burst into tears or post on social media. I looked at the number, I looked at the research that I'd been reading about fasting and cardiovascular adaptation, and I thought, right, that checks out. That's the honest version. It proved what the research had said was possible. I was pleased to see it work out. I'd been overweight for most of my adult life. In fact, pretty much all of my adult life. Hadn't been the healthiest person. And here was a number that belonged to someone who possibly runs marathons. Not because I'd run any marathons, but because I'd stopped eating for 3 weeks. That's the thing that stayed with me, not the number itself, the mechanism behind it. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's useful to you. So what does the pattern actually tell us? I think there are 3 things here, and I want to be precise about what the data supports and what it doesn't. The first thing is this: the body's cardiovascular load is not fixed. Most of us walking around with a resting heart rate that reflects a metabolic state we've been in for years, decades in some cases, a state of being regularly fed, regularly insulin elevated, carrying more body weight than is ideal, with a heart that's been working against all of that for a long time. We assume that's just where we are. That's just our heart rate. To change it, you need to train, do cardio, get fit in the conventional sense. The data suggests that's not quite right, or rather it's one route, but it's not the only one. When you change the metabolic inputs, specifically when you give the body extended periods without food, when insulin drops and the body shifts to fat as a fuel source, the cardiovascular system responds. Not slowly, not over years, within 2 weeks in my case. It was measurable at day 12. The second thing that changed is temporary in the sense that it reflects a particular metabolic state, not a permanent adaptation. When I resumed eating, the heart rate drifted back. That's not failure of the fast, that's just honest biology. The fast showed me what was possible. It didn't permanently rewire my cardiovascular system in the way that years of endurance training might. But, and this matters for how to start exercising after years of inactivity, what it did do was demonstrate that the cardiovascular system is more responsive than most people over 50 believe it to be. If 58 beats per minute is reachable from a dead start in 3 weeks by changing what goes into the body rather than training the heart directly, that's useful information. It means the gap between where you are now and where you could be is probably smaller than you think. The third thing, and this is the one I got wrong for 40 plus years, is the sequencing. I thought cardio was the entry point to better cardiovascular health. Run first, improve later. What the data actually suggests is that metabolic health comes first. If you fix the metabolic environment, reduce insulin load, carry less body weight, give the heart less to work against, Cardiovascular fitness doesn't just improve, it becomes easier to build. The heart's already running quieter. Exercise over 50 works differently when the baseline has been reset. In my case, I haven't become someone who exercises obsessively. What I do now is walk consistently and more than I used to. The difference is that the walking is going on top of a metabolic foundation that's substantially different to what I had 3 years ago. The multiplication works differently. That's what layer 3 is about in the Way More Than Weight Loss system. Movement as a multiplier, not movement as the starting point, but movement on top of layers 1 and 2. This is why the sequencing matters. N equals 1, obviously. One person, 121-day fast, one heart rate monitor. I can't tell you this would be your pattern, but I can show you the data. If I were starting this again, knowing what I now know about how to start exercising after a long break, I wouldn't start with the exercise. I know that sounds backwards, but I spent years trying to improve my health through activity, while the metabolic environment was unchanged. The results were what you'd expect. Temporary improvement, then regression, then abandonment. What changed everything wasn't getting fitter. It was changing what went into the body first. If I were advising my earlier self, sort the sleep, change the food, change the window in which you eat, get the metabolic baseline shifted, then add movement on top of that new baseline. The multiplication is real. Trying to multiply something broken doesn't work. If you're already tracking and you've got a heart rate monitor or a wearable, check your resting heart rate before and after a fasting period. Even an overnight fast extended by a few hours. In my case, the change was visible at day 12 of a 21-day fast. But that's an extreme example. The principle holds at shorter windows too. If your resting heart rate is consistently in the 80s or above and you're not doing anything to address the metabolic load, that's a signal worth paying attention to. Not a diagnosis, not something to panic about, a signal. And if you've been on statins or blood pressure medication and your resting heart rate has been elevated for years, maybe it's worth a conversation with your GP about what the underlying inputs look like. For those of you who are watching this, not because you've got a diagnosis, but because something feels off. Maybe you're getting breathless more easily than you used to. Maybe someone mentioned your blood pressure in passing. Maybe you're just noticing that how to start exercise again feels harder than it should, or that exercise for over 50s has been in your search history more than once. This is the pattern I'd want you to see. The heart rate data I showed you didn't come from training. It came from changing the inputs to the system, which means if your cardiovascular baseline feels like it's heading in the wrong direction, the question isn't only what exercise should I do, it's also what is the metabolic environment my heart is working against every day? And is there something I can change there first? That's a curiosity question, not a catastrophe question, but it's worth asking before things get clinical. If you want to track this properly, I've got a simple monitoring template in the description below. It's the same framework that I use to track biomarkers, heart rate, and fasting periods across this 21-day fast. Links below. It won't tell you what the numbers mean, it'll just help you spot your own patterns over time. And that's what this is about. Your data, your body, your patterns. This is educational content only. It's not medical advice. If you're on blood pressure or heart medication, please do speak to your GP before changing your fasting pattern, diet, or anything else.